the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America.
And I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick, Chief Content Officer of Ancient Faith Ministries and a priest of the Antiochian Archdiocese. And we're the Orthodox Intro team.
If you're looking for a first stop online to get an introduction to the Orthodox faith,
a place to get answers to questions from qualified Orthodox Christian clergy,
a place to send your friends and not just toss them into the chaos of the internet,
a place to get help finding an Orthodox parish and get plugged into an actual Orthodox community, then point your web browser at orthodoxintro.org. Orthodoxintro.org is a free service of Ancient Faith Ministries and made possible by our donors. It's an Orthodox on-ramp to the Christian life. Again, that's orthodoxintro.org.
Proclaiming Christ, victor over sin and death. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, your Orthodox Internet radio connection.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. This is a live call-in show, so we'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Matushka Trudy will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. Now, we have various ways for you to give feedback. To comment online, we encourage you to go either to the AFM Facebook page at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Ministries and place a question or a comment in the thread for tonight's show where it is being live simulcast, or you can go to facebook.com/Ancient Faith Today and place a question there in the thread for tonight's show. You can even send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com, and you can send us an SMS text to 412-206-5012. If you want to send us a text right now, you can send us 412-206-5012. So let's get started. 2020 was the beginning of a stressful time for people around the world. In the United States, statistics show that in 2020, around 41.4 million people sought mental health treatment or counseling. 1 in every 6 Americans entered therapy for the first time in their lives, according to a new survey. 31% of Americans who either continued or returned to therapy during the last year. Researchers found that 15% also began taking medication for mental health issues for the first time. Another 15% changed or increased their prescription dosages during the pandemic. Among some, there's a negative perception about going to therapy. For instance, 47% of people believe that entering therapy is a sign of weakness. Others disregard their own mental health issues. For instance, 3 in 10 people who are not in therapy say it's because they don't believe their problems are bad enough to need professional help. Another 32% say they can handle problems on their own. Now, there may also be a religious bias regarding psychological treatment. It is certainly true that the worldview of some psychological methods are absolutely not compatible with Orthodox Christianity, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Others may believe that psychological treatment at all is a sign of weak faith or is a capitulation to a worldly approach to mental health. So, here's our question for tonight. what's the compatibility of Orthodox Christianity and psychotherapy? And about psychotherapy itself, what is good and bad and ugly? Here to answer those questions is our resident expert, Father Paul Giannakis. Father Paul is the rector of St. Luke Orthodox Church in Palos Hills, Illinois, and is also the chancellor of the Diocese of the Midwest in the Orthodox Church in America. A graduate of Concordia College and St. Vladimir Seminary. Additionally, he holds dual master's degrees in community and addictions counseling. He's also a licensed professional counselor for the Ethos Counseling Group. Father Paul Giannakis, welcome back to Ancient Faith Today.
Good to be here again, Father Thomas. Thank you very much.
I'm so glad that you're here. This is really important, and I'll tell you why. Because it seems like there are sort of too many black and white approaches to all of this. It's either, you know, in terms of being an Orthodox Christian, you're either all in or you're all out. So on one hand, you have people that are, you know, just all into psychotherapy and they kind of disregard the church's teaching. And then there's another group that say, you know, it's all Freudian, it's all trash, it's just nothing but sort of worldly manipulation, it's pseudoscience. So I really want to talk about a lot of this today. And I know in the sort of pre-show notes that we were sending back and forth, you're going to talk a little bit about the book by Metropolitan Hierotheos, about Orthodox psychotherapy. And I think that's important because I'll get to that in a second. But, you know, essentially, I think that what people will do is they won't necessarily read this book because when we get to talk about what you have to say about this, it's really fascinating. So they'll say, oh, you know, modern psychology, no, don't do that. Just read Orthodox psychotherapy. But what Metropolitan Hierotheos says is something totally different. So we'll get there.
Right.
I find that really fascinating. Let's start here. Before we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, tell us, as an Orthodox priest and a professional counselor, what is psychotherapy?
So psychotherapy, strictly speaking, is the healing of the soul. Remember, the word therapy comes from a Greek word, the Greek root meaning to cure, to heal. And of course, when we speak about psychology, psychotherapy, it's the healing or the cure of the soul from the Greek word psychis. So as you just mentioned with this wonderful book, Orthodoxy Orthodoxy as Psychotherapy by Metropolitan Hierotheos, his whole point in that book is that we cannot make a division. We cannot make too strong of a separation between what is true psychotherapy and what is really orthodoxy, because orthodoxy as such is the mystery of our healing in Christ. Or even to say this, you know, to sum up the book, he would say that healing is salvation. Right? That Christ is the physician of soul and body, and that in the Orthodox Church, we experience the church's life as healing, and that the church is, of course, a hospital, and that everything that is done within the church, sacraments, liturgy, worship, confession, pastoral guidance, prayer, fasting, all of the ascetical disciplines, these are done as psychotherapy in a strictly Orthodox, Orthodox kind of way. So he's saying that from the beginning, Orthodoxy and Christianity as such has no war with psychotherapy. We just have to define that term as something that it really belongs to the church, and then of course it belongs to the gospel. If we're looking at it again in this fundamental or foundational kind of way, that salvation is healing, and that our psychotherapy from the church's point is all about the healing of the soul. Now, when we speak of the soul too, we have to remember that It also involves the mind. And then, of course, we have to include our bodies. So it's also it's also holistic. It's multidimensional. And I
Okay.
like to say that the church has always appropriated everything that it sees around itself that is holy, good, beautiful, and true. And this is really one of the most remarkable features of Orthodoxy, is that we don't just draw that line, like you said very well at the beginning of the show, that everything inside the church is white and everything outside of the church must therefore
Mhm.
be black. The church's theology, as a matter of fact, as an elaboration upon the gospel, uses over the history of time, and appropriates many kinds of different philosophical, historical, poetic, literary, literary schemes that have come down to us. And don't get me started about the liturgy and that subject too, because there's so much
Sure.
about that, especially from
Right.
a literary point of view. But really what Orthodoxy as Psychotherapy, this wonderful book, says is that healing is our salvation, and that
Mhm.
this salvation is something that we experience by faith mystically within the life of the church by becoming one in Christ, and especially through the
Mhm.
healing of both the soul from its passions and the mind from what we would call just bad thoughts and bad thinking. And
Yeah,
so church is all about that.
I do I know our show is not about this book, and
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
want to kind of nip this in the bud, because I have encountered this online where people
sure.
say, well, just read that book, but I just give me like a minute of latitude here, because what he says is, I'm gonna read two very short quotes. He says, "But since many psychiatrists do not know the church's teaching, or do not wish to apply it, and since their anthropology is very different from the anthropology and soteriology of the fathers, in
Yes,
using the term psychotherapy, I have not made use of their views." Now,
right.
what he says in the introduction is, and I'm just going to read these two things. He says,
Mhm.
the term Orthodox psychotherapy does not refer to specific cases of people suffering from psychological problems of neurosis. Rather, it refers to all people. And then he says again, I would like to reemphasize that the diagnosis of all neurotic and pathological states are not the subject of this book, for they belong to the domain of psychiatry and neurology.
Yes, right.
See,
So
so he
it's
is
interesting.
saying, yeah, he's saying that, look, there is room for psychology, but
Hmm.
what he's laying out in this book is, as exactly like you said, the
Hmm.
healing of the soul, the healing of the person,
Hmm.
and how in Orthodoxy we see the person. So there's kind of room
Right.
there for the good, at least, that exists in psychotherapy.
And of course, as anything else in medicine, the way that we see it is that all of it comes from Christ. He is not only the physician, he is our medicine. He is our healing. He's everything. So any of this psychiatry or psychotherapy or psychology, anything that's truly good and truly truly working in this kind of way, it's Christ's very own, and that's why he gives it the green light and gives us that kind of anthropological, qualification. Correct.
Right. So let's
Yeah.
start there. The show is what's good, bad, and ugly about psychotherapy. So tell us, Father Paul, from your practical standpoint as an
Sure.
Orthodox priest, and again, great knowledge of the sort of the Orthodox science, if you will, of
Yes.
psychotherapy.
Yes.
What's good about psychotherapy?
Okay. And again, we make the qualification that we begin this type of healing and this type of science, this medicinal science, we begin it from the life of the church, and we see it through the lens of the church's life. So here are a few things that I think are very, very good about psychotherapy, and that are directly related to the Orthodox understanding of salvation. Number one, therapy helps us to self-reflect in a really positive way. And so much of psychotherapy has to do with our identity. Who am I really? How am I really? And so often, many of our clients the clients that come into our offices, they go through life doing the things that they do, and they become so busy, so wrapped up in all of their doing, that they lose sight about their being. So and I've spoken about this before, I think on our previous shows, one of the things that we look at, in terms of this self-reflection is what does it mean to be a human person? And how is my being? Because the being has to come before for the doing. And so being able to look at ourselves in a safe place, and where we can be vulnerable with someone who cares for us and loves us, is really the basic, the basic, the starting line of it. Therapy, number two, it also, and this is really important, it teaches us what we call self-agency. And self-agency from a clinical point of view basically means two things. It means freedom and responsibility both. For example, let's look at it in terms of dealing with some mental illness problems. Someone who's suffering from anxiety. Many people suffer from many different kinds and different degrees and shades of OCD, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder. If we're suffering from that kind of anxiety, it is going to gradually limit our life, right? We will no longer be able to be free, and so we're going to feel like we're going to become more and more stuck. And being stuck in some kind of a place, mentally, emotionally, psychologically, this is really where a lot of mental illness kind of comes to comes home, because it gradually limits our functioning. But therapy allows us our freedom. It gives us our freedom back, and it helps us to become kind of it gives us our responsibility for taking, I don't want to say taking back control, but it gives us this ability to start taking the right kind of steps, and helps us to move out of being stuck. And that's really a common thing, in so many situations where people come and are needing help with their mental health.
Father
Yeah.
Paul, let me
Yeah.
ask you, in the process of psychotherapy, and I have a 1,000 different questions here, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to imagine somebody sitting in therapy, and you're kind of at the mercy of the therapist, right?
Yes.
You go in, you get what your health insurance pays for. I'm speaking about in
Right.
the United States, right?
Right.
You don't necessarily know who you're going to get, or what their worldview is, what their perspective is. You're talking here about like self-agency and responsibility and building this kind of self-awareness,
And freedom. Yeah.
and gaining freedom. Are these principles that every therapist kind of works on regardless of their worldview? In other words, you're talking about the good, and I know you're going to get to the bad and the ugly,
Right.
but how does a person find someone, or how do they know, like, yeah, this is heading in the right direction, or this is really where I want to go? Or should an Orthodox Christian, like when they're starting therapy, should they say, look, I'm an Orthodox Christian, and what I'm really hoping to do is be free of this neurosis, whatever, OCD, or
Yeah.
whatever
Right.
you're talking
Right.
about, and to develop a kind of freedom and self-agency and responsibility
Mhm.
about my life.
Mhm.
Is that the way it should go?
It really is across these mental health disciplines, whether you're a psychologist or psychiatrist or a psychotherapist. We do begin with this necessary element of what we call, clinician client rapport, and that rapport is the basis of all good healing, meaning that um, the client needs to be able to connect and to trust this person that is in this very safe space. That's what we call it, a clinical setting. It's a safe space where they're going to be able to become vulnerable and really open up and feel that they're going to be able to speak about these things in their lives without feeling, that they're going to be basically judged, or even more fearfully that they're going to be shamed. And so this
Okay.
element of care, suspension of judgment, um, you know, um, all of this is the foundation of even what we would call good modern psychotherapy. And in
Hmm.
most graduate programs and PhD programs, they actually begin with this understanding of a healthy connection, respectful
Oh, good.
connection, about rapport. And I often will advise some of my other friends. I don't hear, obviously, I don't. We're going to talk about dual relationships as being part of the bad and the ugly with clinicians. I don't. I'm. It's unethical for me as a priest to counsel anyone in my parish, for example.
Hmm.
So
Interesting.
if someone joins my parish, which they have, who was a former client, I have to tell them, well, now, be very clear. I'm your pastor.
Okay.
We have to redefine that relationship, even though we still have that same kind of we still have that same longevity that goes on in terms of what's happening in this person's life. But that rapport and that connection and that respect, and I would even say goodwill and love, is the door that opens up to everything else. And when somebody goes into a clinician, to a psychotherapist, and they cannot connect, it's either usually because of one or two things. One, that they may not be compatible with each other, and that happens all the time, and that's okay. So you have to go somewhere, and you might go on to the next person, take another reference, and get another
Okay.
another session. The other
Therapist. Yeah.
problem is going to come under the ugly part of this, which is where, as we're going to find out, there are a lot of bad therapists out there. Not a lot, but some, as with any other vocation and type of
Sure.
work in this world. And many people get burned by their therapists, and they're not able to connect with them because the therapists are not able to really engage, in this really life-giving, healing, relationship that is the foundation
Okay.
of good, healthy psychotherapy. Yeah,
Good, good.
yeah,
Well, that's helpful.
sure.
An Orthodox Christian could go into therapy pretty much, just expecting that there's at least a modicum of understanding that, that you're building trust and building that relationship and so forth. Um, all right, we want to
Yep.
remind our listeners, that you can join in the conversation at 1-855 AF Radio, or you can send us a text at 412-206-5012. And you are welcome to call in anonymously if you have a question about maybe therapy that you are in right now. Maybe you're having difficulty with the counselor that you have, or maybe you're confused about, as an Orthodox Christian, whether you should be in counseling or not. please give us a call. Again, we're happy to protect your anonymity. You don't have to give your name. Just give us a call at 1-855-237-2346 or send us a text at 412-206-5012. So, Father Paul, let's continue. What is good about psychotherapy from your standpoint?
One more thing too. Actually, two more things that are kind of interrelated, and this is that besides the good self-agency that we are able to recover for ourselves, and which is really part of being a healthy human person, growing in the image and likeness of God. Good psychotherapy, it also, and this is very, very orthodox, it teaches us about self-awareness and insight. We build insight about ourselves. Now, orthodoxy has been all about insight basically from day one. There are two other books that I want to give a shout out, besides the one we just mentioned by Metropolitan Hierotheos. There's a book on CBT, cognitive therapy, by our Bishop Alexis. Bishop Alexis, his last name was Trader. And in this book, he does make a side-by-side comparison between cognitive behavioral therapy and Orthodox spirituality, especially as it has come down to us through the monastic tradition, and so therapy basically says, in this cognitive sense at least, that healing has to do with the kind of thoughts that we have, because the thoughts that we have are what drive our emotions, the way that we feel. The emotions that we have are what drive our physiology, how we feel physically. So often we are psychosomatic creatures. And then besides that, all of this, thoughts and feelings, are going to decide our decision making, and that will decide a whole life. I love that. There's a meme out there which is very good. It says, take care of your thoughts. How you think is how you feel. How you feel is how you act. How you act is how you how you feel is how you decide. How you decide is how you act, and how you act, becomes a destiny, right? You create your destiny simply by the kinds of thoughts that you embrace in your lives. And therapy allows a person in session, in this healing session, to become more insightful and aware as to discerning which of these thoughts are going to be good thoughts, holy thoughts, beautiful thoughts, and which thoughts we would just literally say are from the demons. And as Bishop Alexis has and the monastic tradition, we cannot do that on our own. We will have somebody guide us in that deeper discernment process, whereby we become more mindful, about how we are, in that kind of way. And then also the most beautiful thing about therapy, at least from the Orthodox point of view, and there's another book that I like very much, and I've mentioned it on the show before, The Ethics of Morality, by Dr. Timothy Patitsis, and he gives a really important, very timely critique, and it's brutal actually, on American psychotherapy. We've become kind of a psychotherapeutic nation, and not all of it. A lot of it is actually quite harmful, but you have to read the book. But the one point that he does make, which is really at the basis of therapy, psychotherapy, and healing, is that it brings us to the point of beauty. That we are presented with Christ, who is not only our Savior, but who is the image of the most beautiful mystery in our lives. And it's by embracing his beauty and all of the beauty that we're able to see around us, within ourselves and other human relationships. It's through that beauty that we are healed. And that book, The Ethics of Beauty, really stresses that and emphasizes that well, and brings out this important piece about what can make psychotherapy so powerful, especially in terms of finding what is beautiful in your own life, you know,
Very good.
and that's really a wonderful thing. And he makes a point too. Timothy Petit says that the only way for trauma to be born and to be healed is to move on to the beautiful, and to not just regurgitate, not just to have a clinician telling this client who has terrible PTSD that they have to talk about what's happened to them over and over and over and over again. No, you have to move on from that, let it go, and then you have to find the beauty,
Mm.
that is going to be the dynamic of healing in all of this.
Father,
Yeah.
let me ask you one question, and then we're going to go for a break. Um, I can probably hear maybe some people saying, well, that's what confession is for. You don't need to go to psychotherapy. You don't need to go to counseling. Just go to confession
Yeah.
to your priest. What
Right.
would you say to that?
So I'm going to bring that up under the bad. We've talked about the good, and we're going to talk
Okay.
about the bad, and hopefully we'll get to the ugly.
Okay.
But I'm going to directly. So that's going to take a bit. So maybe we should wait till after the break.
We will do that. Fair enough. All right. You are listening to
Okay.
Ancient Faith today. We are with Father Paul Giannakis, and we're talking about orthodoxy and psychotherapy. Do they overlap? Are they compatible? Are they completely different? Should Orthodox Christians go to psychotherapy? What should they be looking for if they go? Should they stay away from it? Lots of good information here. Totally orthodox. Give us a call at 1-855-AF-RADIO. We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
No end of books these days offer us techniques for self-improvement. But in the newest release from the Ancient Faith store, Gratitude in Life's Trenches, Robin Phillips takes a different tack. He shows us that God meets us where we are, in the pain and heartache of the present moment. Instead of looking for a way to escape from hardship, we can cultivate an attitude of gratitude, peace, and self-acceptance that will transform our experience of suffering. Drawing on his own experiences and his work as a consultant in the behavioral health industry, as well as stories of saints and sufferers, teachings of the fathers, and recent discoveries in neuroscience, Phillips shows us that the journey to personal well-being is one we can all travel, regardless of the hardships we may face. To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
Welcome back. We're talking about orthodoxy and psychotherapy. We're talking with Father Paul Giannakis. Father Paul, so the first part of the program, we talked about the good things of psychotherapy, that, the church likes to appropriate things that are good and holy and true and beautiful. And we talked about this book, Orthodox Psychotherapy by Metropolitan Hierotheos. You talked about healing and how therapy helps us grow in a sort of positive way to gain self-agency and freedom and responsibility. And it gives us the hope that life can be better and that there is beauty in life and we have to move beyond our trauma. So with that, what can be bad and what should people look out, Orthodox Christians especially, what should we look out for in psychotherapy in sort of a modern sense? And I do want you to get very practical because, again, you're rolling the dice when you go out there, right? It depends on your health provider. It depends on what you can afford. and
Right.
what should people be looking out for? And really, the practical part is, how do they approach that? Like, what do they say if they're like, wait a second, time out, that's really not what I want to do? Tell us what's bad.
Right. So again, so much is good, but we have to be, like I said, we were just talking about being discerning. We have to discern the spirits, as St. Paul said. You mentioned that there are some who say that the church is all we need, prayer is all that we need. We should just go to confession, confess ourselves, get the stole, and then we should accept that that should, be the very best. And really, I think that if we look at Orthodoxy, if we look at confession as being not just forgiveness of sins, but reconciliation, and that, of course, healing as reintegration, we recognize that confession is not just a once and done, but that really we confess. I mean, we're confessing regularly as Orthodox Christians, not only because we sin every day, but because our whole life, baptismally speaking, is a is a continual confession from the time of our baptism to the time of our last breath. It's a
Right.
whole confession, right? And so we see in that mystery, some practical things that are going to come up. And so I would hope that the priest would maybe recognize something and say, I have an idea. Let's maybe carry this out after confession, and maybe we can find some help with some good
Okay.
counseling. Now, I found even in my travels, I've done some work in Romania, and I've been through
Oh,
Romania
wow.
3 times, and I worked with a priest in Iași, Romania, wonderful, wonderful man by the name of Father Julian Negro, and he is working with the Romanian Orthodox Church in their ministry for addictions. And his specialty is
Okay.
working with clergy and addictions. And
Mhm.
so what he found, he started with these addictions because he would be hearing these confessions when he was a young priest, and the wives would come and confess that their husbands were drinking and that they were getting
Mm.
beaten. And in many of these villages, these women are beaten to death. It's a horrible
Oh,
situation, and not just Romania; it's all over the world, of course. But Eastern Europe is unique in that
right.
regard. But he finally said, "Enough is enough. If I hear one more wife and mother confess to me that she's being beaten up, I'm going to my bishop, and I'm going to take it in hand that there's going to be what we call an intervention." And so
Good.
with the Romanian Orthodox Church and his metropolitan in Iași, they actually have an Orthodox Alcoholics Anonymous, and they're
Oh, good.
establishing them all over the country, in Romania, in monasteries and parishes. And so there's an Orthodox recovery movement, but that's an example of when you hear a confession, you just can't let it sit. That you're going to
Mm.
need to
Right.
act, and sometimes if we don't act, then it could be to someone's harm. And
Good.
even as
That's helpful.
priests, we are ethically obliged. We don't ever break the seal of Holy Confession, but we are
Sure.
ethically obliged, with what we call the duty to warn. And so we should have some basic knowledge about what to do, where to go with some of these things, especially if
Mhm.
somebody is suffering from something more traumatic in those terms. But even
I
somebody
will
with
tell you, though,
yeah,
let me interrupt you for 1 second. I will tell you, though, it's a very tricky thing.
it is.
It's very, I am a layperson when it comes to psychology.
Yeah,
And having been a priest for 22 years now, obviously hearing thousands of confessions, um, it, you definitely get a sense of, oh, this person should probably be seeing a counselor, right?
sure.
But on the other hand, telling someone that it's tricky
It's
because you don't
very
want to
tricky.
offend, you don't want to, imply something. it could be really very sensitive.
But it can be simple too, because all that the pastor would need to do in this case is to say at the end of confession, if you would like, I'd very much like to continue this discussion in my office confidentially, and I have some ideas that might help, and that's the
Okay.
open door, and that's all you can do. And
Okay.
and if they bite on it, which they usually do, sometimes they don't, then we can, but I've had, people suffering from OCD and who really struggle, with perfectionism, and in confession that can be particularly painful. But that's a whole nother, subject in itself. So
Sure.
we need to watch out for that, that kind of, I believe that, Orthodoxy is very practical in that respect, and
Yes.
if we need to allow people to make the decision to go out and get good help, that has to be part of our confession. I mean, it just can't be so locked up in that kind of way.
Okay.
Another
What else
problem
is
with
bad about some
yeah.
forms of psychotherapy?
Okay, good. So in America, let me say this, that in a negative sense, psychotherapy in the secular sense of the word has become, it's become an American religion. We think
Wow.
in terms of pop psychology. We talk to friends in terms of these kind of in terms of these ideas very often. We even, will say very horrible things, that person is crazy, and that person is bipolar. These are these horrible pejorative terms that I hear people use all the time, right? But where does that come from? It's from this kind of American religion of pop psychology. But what the negative part of this can be that counseling in a secular sense can really foster kind of this solipsism, and by that I mean that it can keep a person being locked inside of themselves, right? So solipsism means that the only thing that exists is someone's mind and their own kind of experience from
Right.
this
Right.
subjective point of view, right?
Right.
So bad counseling is going to be all about that person, and life becomes, what I love to say, is a hall of mirrors. They only see themselves, and if that's all that they're doing, if that's all counseling is, then there's not going to be any healing, because healing means we have to transcend ourselves, we have to move beyond ourselves,
Hmm.
we have to
Interesting.
lose ourselves in the Lord, because it's only when we lose ourselves that we can find our truest self. And so much of modern secular counseling is just so self-focused that it becomes, like I said, a hall of mirrors, and it's solipsistic.
It's interesting.
um,
It's
yeah.
interesting that you say that, because are you actually saying that? First of all, let's define our terms. When you say modern pop psychology, are you
Yep.
talking about Dr. Phil and whatever else is on TV and modern pop psychologist writers? What do you
Yeah,
mean by that?
more of the culture, more of the pop psychology culture. And remember too that in even many Christian circles, that so-called, evangelical, pop psychology has been blurred. If you read something by Joel Osteen, the
Yeah,
best you, what is it? The
I
best
see.
you now. It's
Yeah,
solipsistic.
right.
it's
I
it's
see. I see.
totally, this kind of American, psychology, pop psychology. But from our point of view, salvation lies in the fact that we have to die to self so that Christ might rise in us, and that's the cross, and that's the only healing that we can ever know. And if we're still stuck in that prison of self, then it will be literally, I think, just a continual hell. And related to this also is what I call the danger of forever therapy, and what some people can call I don't ever say it, but counseling junkies. So some people are in forever therapy because they love being kind of stuck on self, and they love talking about themselves ad nauseum.
Right.
And even when the clinician or the counselor says, well, tell me about your family, tell me about your relationships, they will always refer to those relationships not in terms of the persons, but in terms of what they do for them, right? Because it's solipsistic. So in my office, for example, I open up all of my sessions with one question. My first question is, tell me what your life is going to look at when you fire me as your therapist, because that's my goal. Right? I want to know where we're going, and I want to know what it's going to take in order to get where we need so that you can fire me. And so that you can gain this self-agency. Yes. Now some of them are
people aware.
Yeah.
Are they self-aware enough? Maybe that's not the right term, but are they healthy enough at that time to say, this is what I want my life to look like?
Many times they are.
Okay.
Yeah, many times they are. Many times they are not. They're just so deep in the hole that they're going to say, I have no idea. And my response to that is,
fascinating.
That's a great answer in therapy. And that's a wonderful place to begin. Not only because we're being honest, but because we say, I don't know. And not knowing is not a bad thing. It's different from being ignorant. It means that we just don't know. I love working with.
And it also means that maybe they don't have an icon of what a healthy life is supposed to be. Right?
Of course, yeah. And that's the thing. So I mean, I love working with Archbishop Paul because one of his most often repeated phrases is, I don't know. Well, I don't know, and it some people, it might sound trite, but it's actually for me a kind of a very consoling thing. But it's okay not to know at that point, and that's where we have to do so. That's what we do when we go exploring.
Good.
You go exploring, so and that's the hard work.
What else would be bad about, because we're coming up pretty close to, we're about 12 minutes away from close, so we do want to get to the really ugly part, but what else is bad?
Sure. So one more thing that we just touched on before, and this is the fact that we cannot disconnect psychotherapy from the church's life, and especially the sacrament of Holy Confession, because there is a strong pressure for all of us as Orthodox in America to categorize life, to categorize, our calendars, and as I said, in my notes, to categorize is to secularize. We want to reintegrate everything into the person of Christ mystically, so that Christ can be all in all, everyone in everything. And so we want to make sure, and this is the word that I use, that this relationship between the sacraments and between psychotherapy is as seamless as it possibly can be. And I've gone to a few conferences, some meetings with the Orthodox Association of Medicine, Psychology, and Religion, which is doing very good work under the bishops. But there's pressure there to I can see it, to kind of categorize, and you need to do that to some extent. But they make a good point of doing their conferences, with services during the day, and then they finish, with the Eucharist, all together. So those are kind of the bad things that,
okay.
Yeah. So should we go on? Let's go on to the ugly.
Yeah. I let me just remind everybody, we still have a couple minutes left. So if you'd like to call, give us a call at 1-855-AF radio, or send me a text at 412 206-5012. And I love what you said there, Father Paul, about there being this sort of continuity
Yes.
with the church's life. And I feel sorry for people that walk in. Maybe I'm emphasizing that too much, but maybe an Orthodox Christian needs to be honest with their therapist and say, look, these are my religious values, and I really want to try to maintain them and integrate them. But I can see that there probably are some really weird things that might be brought up in therapy that would be totally antithetical to the Orthodox way of life. And I suppose that would be covered under the ugly, yeah?
Yeah, it sure is. So let's just kind of go through some of this real quick. The ugly, number one, and this is something that I learned from this wonderful Southern author. His name was Walker Percy. And we were turned on to Walker Percy at seminary by the late Father Tom Hopko, whom we both love and whose memory we cherish. But Walker Percy was also writing this very unique nonfiction about kind of cultural critiques. And he critiqued a lot of his psychology during his own day in the 1960s. And what he said was this. He said that the problem overall with modern psychology is that it's incoherent, meaning that it cannot present, and you touched on this just before, it cannot present us with a picture of what is fully healthy in human life. It can only speak about what is sick. In other words, it can only speak in pathological terms. So there's no coherence, there's no integrity. And that piece is kind of the thing that sticks out the most as Orthodox clinicians when we're working in this industry, that it's not only so loose, but it's just varied and at odds, and it's just hanging all over the place. It cannot speak
Father,
in a coherent way.
Is it because especially today, the world's values, I'm saying in air quotes, the world's values are so all over the place that they have nowhere to kind of take you to? Is that the problem, that there's no kind of goal other than, maybe either to, I can imagine there's sort of somebody saying, well, look, I have this terrible habit, the sexual habit that I do all the time. And somebody, a therapist would say, well, what's wrong with that? That's just normal.
Exactly. They're going to normalize it.
Right.
Well, and that's really the problem. Welcome to the 21st century. Where there's no foundation for a common understanding of what is healthy in a mental or in an emotional or psychological kind of way. There's just no groundwork for it. And that's why we have all of these different types of psychological sciences, in all of their variations. But this piece is actually, it's actually very ugly in the sense that if something is going to purport to heal, it has to have a very clear picture of what that healing is and what it means. And of course, we see that in Christ, and that's why I'm saying over and over again that Christ is the beginning, middle, and end of all our psychotherapy. He's all in all. So that's something that we consider. Another really ugly piece of this is that, as I mentioned before, the therapists themselves are not always ethical. Many people have been burned by their therapists, by bad therapy. And therapists too, like myself, we're very aware of our own personal issues and problems and failings and limitations.
Sure.
But there has to be a certain maturity, and there has to be a certain integrity for
Right.
someone to sit in whatever office and to take under their care, healing of another human person in this psychological setting. And as I've said before, hurting people hurt other people. And so if this therapist, if this clinician is a chaotic mess on the inside, what is he
Right.
going to share other than that chaotic mess with his clients? So that's important. And then
But
just
how
as you
will you
said
know?
also,
But
you
like,
would know
how will
quite
you
soon.
know?
Yeah, you
Ah,
would know. I would say that in the most people are able to discern that, even though some are not. And I'm going to touch on that also here in a second,
okay.
when
All
you
right.
really when you sometimes know. Then there are abusive therapists. We're going to go from bad to
Mm,
abusive therapists, where they're either
horrible.
inept, right? They just don't cannot do their work. And again, that's not just for therapists. That's in every discipline. We have problems with priests who are, not able to do their work. um,
Sure.
Bad science. We have bad psychological sciences, pseudo scientific psychologies,
Hmm. Hmm.
Freudianism, which you mentioned, and neurotic sexual repression. We could have a whole show on that, and how the Orthodox would respond to that idea of sexual repression, which is Freudian, which has become a cultural, it's in our language, as I just said.
Yeah. Yeah.
That if we try to live a life that is chaste, it's only because underneath it there's neurotic sexual repression. Well, that's just hogwash. And if you ever meet a really good, loving, faithful Orthodox monastic, you'll really understand, and you'll see something different than any of that. You have crazy stuff out there, pseudoscience, past life regression, meaning that there are some psychotherapists who go digging for past life traumas, believing that there's been some kind of a reincarnation that's taking place, and that the
Oh my
reason that this
goodness.
person is having these problems is because in a past life they experienced some kind of terrible traumatic death. And even though that's been mostly dismissed by all of the psychological, you know, boards, it's still practiced. And I know of,
Wow.
I've heard of some Orthodox clients having been presented with that by their therapists, who, by the way, will ignore the fact purposely that their client is a believing Orthodox Christian, and not only dismiss it,
S-
but try to do
Yeah.
the runaround in order to project onto them not only their own crazy values, as you've just mentioned, but their own this kind of pseudoscience. And in this case,
So would
that's
that
yeah.
be like when they put them under hypnosis or something and they're
Yep,
trying
that's what they
to,
do. Some hypnosis
wow.
can be very good, actually. There is much. I don't know too much about it, so I can't speak. But there is some hypnosis that is being done by clinicians, and has very good outcomes.
Okay.
And I just don't know enough. But they do hypnosis in past life regression,
Crazy.
and that kind of thing. So and then one other thing that's very ugly with this is that 9 to 12% of mental health clinicians break this cardinal rule of what I've just mentioned concerning dual relationships sexually. They enter into romantic relationships with their clients. 10% is 9 to 12% of mental health clinicians are guilty of some kind of a sexual relationship with their clients. And they're just they're getting this data in. And of course there are ethical repercussions for this. Mental health clinicians can lose their license for such things, but it is massively present And if you compare that, for example, with the Orthodox priesthood, as you and I know, something like this is going to be, 1 in 2 in 100 instead of 10 to 12 in 100. But unfortunately, you're not going to hear about that, in the media. So there's the ugly, when they intentionally break that client trust and rapport, because of their own self needs, and crash through these boundaries. Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of goes to your first point about hurting people,
Hurting
by
people
a
hurt.
hurt counselor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you one more area here, and that is, I had alluded to it before, and that is this clash between the values of the world and our Orthodox Christian values. So, for instance,
Yes.
counselors that are, I don't want to say accepting, but are even sort of promoting, immoral acts or
Yeah. Let's call
values
it permissive. Yeah, permissive sexuality.
Yeah,
We'll put it under that heading, and that's where we really have to be careful. And that's where even parents, with their children and teenagers, because that's all over the schools. And I think that as long as the parents are in good contact and have strong connections with their children, they're going to be able to kind of watch out for that. But unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. And I know that in Illinois, for example, a 15-year-old girl who's received, without her parents knowing it, birth control, can get pregnant by her boyfriend, and then go to go and get an abortion, and her parents are not allowed to,
Right.
To intervene in that situation. Which for
or now
us is just this,
transgender therapy.
or
Transgender,
transgender therapy.
yeah.
That's a whole nother show. I mean, that's again, that's for us a form of abuse, right? It's a form of abuse, for these children to have to really kind of suffer this thing.
Can I ask you, just
yeah.
in that thread, just very, very briefly, because
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a controversy here, and I again, I don't think this is a black and white issue, but I know it's a very hot topic in the circles of, for instance, psychology, and then there are laws against it now in certain
Right.
states, and that is counseling for people that have same-sex attractions,
Correct.
but they want to relieve themselves of those same-sex attractions. In other
Sure.
words, this is a person that says, I have this attraction, I do not want to be this person. Do you feel that it's ethical for them to go into counseling, whatever you're calling it, conversion therapy? I'm not saying forcing someone, but someone that feels like they want
Yeah.
to undergo this. Is that permissible?
So no, it not is from a medical point of view any longer in the United States. I think all 50 states, perhaps I might be wrong, but we are not
Wow.
able to do sexual conversion therapy, or what they call reparative. It's usually called reparative therapy, and we can also be brought to the board and have our licenses taken away. And in Canada, I just heard it is now a law that it involves litigation and arrest. So
But Father Paul, if somebody
Yeah.
says, I don't want to be this person, right? I don't want to have these same-sex attractions. How can it not be possible that somebody a professional is not permitted to say, well, let's sit down and talk about this, and let's work through this, and talk about your background and your whatever. I don't understand
Yes.
why that. I think it's wrong if somebody wants to go in that direction, that's another issue.
Yeah.
But
Right.
if an Orthodox Christian says, I don't want this, help me, for it to be
Right.
illegal to work with that person?
It would be in a counseling setting today, in a clinical setting. It would be illegal, and we could lose our licenses. But there are ways to work around it. And by the way, we do work around it. For the sake of that person. We don't enter.
I don't want to get you in trouble.
No, I don't mind saying that it's wrong, and that I'm against it. And we had lengthy discussions about it when I was at the University of Detroit, because they all knew that I was an Orthodox priest, and so I was able to, kind of work with this in my own core values, but I will not, I will not counsel for that permissive sexuality. It's against my faith, and it's against my core values. What I do is this: I say, if you can find a reputable and trustworthy pastor, priest, somebody that can help you with this, go do it. Find them, or a good friend. And there are also and unfortunately, you're not going to hear about this too much, but there are ministries by same-sex oriented persons in Christian circles who are taking care of themselves, who are taking care of this ministry themselves. And that's where I like to go, because I do not assume to speak for this issue for them, right? There is some wonderful material that is being done by persons struggling with same-sex attraction, and the Christian life.
Let's leave that. Let's leave that.
Right, that's a big topic
for another time.
Right.
But I because we're out of time, but I want to get in one quick question here that came in from an anonymous caller, and they asked, do priests need to be better educated as to when to recommend counseling to their parishioners? And I would ask, how do they do that?
Yeah, yes and no. It's always helpful to know a bit of the basics about about kind of what's out there. And I would say here in America, if you're an Orthodox pastor in a parish, you're gonna deal with that right up front very soon, if you're trying to help your parishioners. But I would also say, so that's yes. The no part of it is, if you really love your people, there will be a way that God provides for healing, whether it's in a counseling office or not. That question was posed to Father Tom Hopko many years ago. Someone came to him and said, how come you're not training your seminarians in modern psychology? Why don't you give them classes? And how are they going to ever be able to help their parishioners without education in psychology? And Father Hopko, being Father Hopko, said they don't need to learn psychology. All that they need to do is love them, and there will be healing. And that doesn't mean, like we said at the beginning of the show, that we're going to just say it has to be Orthodox, in dress, and it has to be only Orthodox, and right. But it means that loving, caring relationship, trust, rapport, that's what will open the way to healing and to all of the practical steps that are going to go along with it. Yeah.
Excellent. Father Paul, thank you so much. Always, you're just knocking it out of the park. And really, what's important here is that you gave this beautiful, balanced, and completely Orthodox presentation of the subject that sometimes is dismissed too easily on either side. It's either you're all in or you're all out. And clearly, even from great bishops who write on this, the fathers and so forth, there is room, as long as it's good psychotherapy, there is room for someone who feels that they have a neurosis or some kind of issue that is beyond the capacity
Right.
of their priest to help them with, that they should seek that
Right.
out. Thank you so
Yes,
much for
absolutely.
joining us tonight. We love you
You're
very
welcome,
much,
Father
and we
Tom.
appreciate
Love
everything
being
that
here
you
on
do.
the show again. Thank you
All
for all
right,
your good
take
work
care,
too.
Father Paul. Thank you so
And
much.
thanks to Trudy and everybody in the yeah, wonderful.
Indeed.
Thank you, Father Tom.
Thank you so much. Before I share a few final thoughts, I want to offer my sincere thanks to Father Paul Giannakis for joining us tonight. Thanks also to Matushka Trudy, as Father Paul said, for engineering the program, for everybody that listened in, and for those who will listen. I wanted to read this beautiful prayer that I found online on an Orthodox source for those suffering from mental illness and oppression. O greatly merciful Master, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me and cleanse me from every sadness and disturbance and cowardice. Drive away from me every spiritual, choking, and demonic sorrow that I sense in my body and soul. For you are our joy and the hope of all the ends of the earth and of those far off at sea. Be merciful to me, O Master, upon my sins. Take from me the heavy burden of sin and despair. Drive far away from me every sadness and laziness. Confirm me in your love, and with unassailable hope and unshakable faith in you, through the intercessions of your spotless mother and all your saints. Amen. And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.